So let us add div class is equal to container in app component.html. And that will add padding to each and every page. So if I go to app component.html, so this is one HTML tag that I'm adding that also includes Bootstrap. This div is the HTML element called division, and this class is equal to container. This is the Bootstrap code. So wherever we see class is equal to, that means it is Bootstrap. So this tag, this class is equal to container, it creates padding around the content. So if we see here, earlier we had this login to do in here. Like say for example, if I remove this, if I remove this, we see that the login goes all the way to the starting point of the page. But when we enclose the content of the page in div, then it looks nicely padded. And because we are including it in app component.html around router outlet, so this padding starts appearing in every one of our pages, in the login page, in the to-dos page. So padding appears in every one of our pages. So in list to-dos component.html, so we want to include more HTML and Bootstrap code into the menu and the footer. So we want the menu to contain items like login, home, to-dos, etc. So let me open menu component.html. So I want to remove this code and instead include all of this code. So all of this is HTML code. According to HTML5 standards, the menu must be enclosed in the header tag. And all of these are HTML tags except the class equal to. So wherever we see class is equal to, that is Bootstrap class. So these are Bootstrap classes. So UL stands for unordered list, which is used to define the menu items, and LI is used to define the individual menu items. So href, it defines the link, and class is equal to navlink is the Bootstrap class that defines the format, and this is the content, this is the text of the link that the user sees. So if I save it, and here the Bootstrap class navbar -brand, this indicates that this text is related to brand, and this text appears in a bit bigger font. So if I save this, and if I go to the home page, we can now see the menu here that has Java study group, which is the brand. It has home, to-dos, login, and logout links. So we created the menu. And now let us create the footer. So let me just remove this text and include the actual footer. So, and along with the HTML, let us include little bit of styling in footer component.css file. This just defines some positioning and the background color. So this HTML in combination with this CSS, it will result in a footer. So this is the footer that we created. And this menu and footer, they appear on every one of our pages. So to do, it will actually take to the to-dos list, and home will take to the login page. Login will also take to the login page. So that is how we created menu and footer components. And the next thing we should do is to handle the table in the to-dos page. So right now, if I go to to-dos page, it is displaying the table in the HTML format. So if I look at list to-dos.component.html, right now I have this code, table border is equal to 1. So this is HTML. So let me comment it, and instead of that code, let me include this code. So all I'm saying is, instead of border is equal to 1, I'm saying class is equal to table, and this is the bootstrap table. So as soon as I do this, we can see that the table format is changed and it looks much better now. And the next change we are going to do is in login page. So in login page, let's go to the login page, and we see this login button. So let's see how this login button is formatted in login component.html. So it's formatted like this. We're just saying button click. So this is HTML. So instead of this, I want to include this code. So this one is just the same as this, except that we are including a bootstrap button class in here. So we are saying the class of the button is btn and then btn hyphen success. So this will result in a green color button. So let's see how the button changed now. So it looks much better with a green color. So the next change we are going to do is in the login error message. So right now, if we enter incorrect login details, we are seeing this error message. And we want to change this error message to much better formatting. And we can do it by going to by commenting this in the login component.html file. And instead of that, I'm including this code. So this is a div element with a class alert warning. So this is the bootstrap class. So here I don't have that class, and in here I added that class. So now if we see, so the error message is displayed as a warning in yellow color. So that is because of the bootstrap class we added. So we made all the HTML and bootstrap and CSS changes to our pages up until now. And now Let's look at the difference between href and router link. So if we go to menu component.html, so we are displaying the links using this code, and in here we are saying a href is equal to login path. So this href, it is HTML. So when I say that, these are the menu links we are talking about. So if I click on any of these links, the href part starts working, and then the entire page gets loaded. So right now, because of the href in here, the entire page is getting loaded, and this looks really slow. It looks really slow. So instead of href, if we do router link, so I'm replacing href with router link, and router link is Angular. It's an Angular keyword. So router link does not refresh the entire page. Instead, it just displays the corresponding component that we are trying to access. So that will result in the page getting loaded really fast. So this is much faster than before. Much faster. Immediately we are seeing the page contents. So that is the difference between href and router link. And the purpose of a router link is to make sure only the component that we are accessing gets refreshed, but not the entire page. The single page this is nothing but the concept of single page application. So when we are talking about the single page application, whenever the user clicks on a link or something, the entire page does not get refreshed. Instead, only the component that the user is trying to access gets refreshed. So that is the whole concept of single page application. And Angular is a single page application framework, and that is why we have to use router link instead of href. And now we have certain goals. Anyone has any questions?
Sorry, I have one question. Those Bootstrap HTML format, right? Those classes, where they are defined, those classes, in which CSS? Or is it from the href, the internet?
These classes, yes. See, we are importing this bootstrap.min.cs
Okay.
from
Yeah,
internet.
I got it. From here, okay. All CSS loading from this URL, internet.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So now we have certain goals. We have already implemented the login functionality, but maybe we haven't implemented it correct. So we want to implement the login functionality correct. That is our first goal. Our second goal is, right now, the user is able to see all of these links all the time. When the user is logged in, the user should not be able to see the login link, but he's able to see this link regardless of whether he's logged in or not. And also this logout link, he should see it only when he's logged in. He is not supposed to see it when he's not logged in. But right now, the user is able to see all the links regardless. So we want to change that. We want to display only the appropriate links for the user depending on whether he's already logged in or not. So that is our second goal. And then we have a third goal. We want to implement the logout functionality. So with these three goals, we will look at the rest of the slides. So we have a service in Angular, and we have several components in Angular that we created. And say, for example, welcome component.ts, this file contains code related to welcome component. The login component contains the code that is related to login component. List to-dos component.ts contains the code that is related to list to-dos component. But what if there is some code that has to be shared by all the components? So we cannot place that kind of a code in any one particular component. For that, we use a service. So service holds the code that can be used across all the components. So now we want to create a service called hard-coded authentication, and we can create it by using this particular command, this one. So instead of ng generate component, we are saying ng generate service, and then we are trying to create a service called hard-coded authentication, and we are trying to create in a directory name called service. So this command, it will first create a directory called service, and within the directory service, it's going to create an Angular service called hard-coded authentication. And I have already done that. And when I created that service, the service directory got created, and within this directory, two files got created. So one is the .service.ts file, which will contain the code, and another one is .service.spec.ts file, which contains the unit tests defined in this code. So we got the two files. So if I open this file, so it has the class hard-coded authentication service, and this is just a class, and it is made a service because of this decorator @injectable. So this decorator makes this class a service. So now in this file, we want to create a in this file, we want to create a method called authenticate. So if we look at login component.ts, we are right now we are actually authenticating the user in this handle login method using this code. So instead of doing this authentication here, we want to move all the authentication into our service. All the login, logout related code, we want to move it into hard-coded authentication service.ts. So I have created a method called authenticate that accepts username and password as the parameters. And if the username is equal to Java study group and the password is equal to password, this is exactly the same as it was in login component.ts. It's exactly the same code. If that is the case, we are returning true, else we are returning the false. So this is the authenticate method I have created in hard-coded authentication service. So to call authenticate method of this service from login component, we need to follow these steps. So in order to call this method from from here, we need to first define an instance variable, and we are doing that in Angular. We are doing that in the constructor method as a parameter. So this is the variable I'm defining of class hard-coded authentication service. And this statement, this parameter here, it does two things. It creates an instance variable in this class called authentication service of type hard-coded authentication service. And then it creates an object of type hard-coded authentication service, and then it assigns it to the instance variable. So this is dependency injection. So in one shot, we are creating an instance variable, and also we are assigning an object of this type to this instance variable. So now we have this object available. So once we have this object available, let me comment this because I don't need this line. Instead, I'm using this line. So now I have the object of type authentication service, and on that object, I'm calling the authenticate method. I'm calling this method that I defined here, and I'm passing this dot username and this dot password. So I'm basically performing the same authentication, but instead of using the old code, I'm using the hard-coded authentication service authenticate method. So that is the only change I made. So now if we try to run and see how it works. So I'm able to still log in. So that worked, the change that I made. So now we want to save this username somewhere so that we can use it for further authentication. So that can be done using web storage. So before HTML5, application data had to be stored in cookies. But from HTML5, application data can be stored in web storage. Web storage is more secure and large amounts of data can be stored locally without affecting website performance. So let's look at here. Let me go to the where are the developer tools? So if I go to the developer tools and application, so if I go this one here, it indicates the web storage. So this web storage is local and it is specific to the browser. So here in the session storage, I have this our current website, and here we can store the key value pairs. Here we can store whatever we want to store, and we can use these values later in our application in other components. So that is about session storage. And this session storage, as soon as we close the browser, the data in the session storage is lost. It only lives as long as the browser tab is open. So this session storage in Angular, it can be accessed by session storage object. So we can access the session storage by session storage object. Once the user logs in, so now we want to store the user authentication information in that session storage. And we can do it in hard-coded authentication service by doing this. So we are saying session storage, it is the object dot set item. So this is the key. We are giving the key as authenticated user, and to that we are passing the value of username. So whichever is the username, it is passed in here, and the key authenticated user will have that value. So if I save this and if I log in, now we can see that the key authenticated user has a value Java study group. So whichever user logs in, we can see that value here. So now we have something that we can rely on in order to know whether the user is logged in or not. So now we need to display the menu items based on whether the username exists in session storage or not. So in order to do that, we need to create a method called isUserLoggedIn in the hard-coded authentication service. So this is the hard-coded authentication service, and I'm creating the method isUserLoggedIn, and we are defining a local variable. So let is a JavaScript keyword, and this keyword is just like the keyword var, except that let keyword is used to define the local variables, whereas var keyword, it is used to define the global variables. So we are creating a local variable called user, and we are trying to get the value of the key authenticated user. So when the idea is that when the user is not logged in, the value of this key would be null. Like, I'm just trying to manually remove it. So now there is no key value pair. In other words, there is no value for the key. So the idea is that when this key has some value, then that means the user is logged in. If this key doesn't have any value, that means the user is not logged in. So we are just writing the same logic in here. So if the user is null, that means the user is not logged in. So we are just negating it in order to return the right value. So we have a method now that returns true when the user is logged in, and it returns false when the user is not logged in. So now we need to use this method in order to display the right menu items on the home page. So when the user is not logged in, we want to display just the login link. When the user is logged in, we want to display all other links except the login link. So in order to do that, we need to go to the menu component. So basically we need to do it in menu component.html because this is where we are defining the links. But before we can do anything here, we need to access the code of the menu component. And because we want to make use of hard-coded authentication service, we need to create a parameter in the constructor method. And by doing this, we are actually creating an instance variable in this menu component. And we are also assigning an object of hard-coded authentication service to this instance variable. And we need to make it public this time because we are trying to access this service from outside the menu component. We are actually trying to access this from menu component.html file. So once we have this instance variable here, we can access this instance variable from menu.component.html file. And when we can access this instance variable, we can also access the method isUserLoggedIn that we defined here. So this one really returns whether the user is logged in or not. So let me just include it here. So we are using ngIf. So basically we are saying that if the user is logged in, then display home link. If the user is logged in, then display to-dos link. If the user is logged in, then display logout link. If the user is not logged in, only then display the login link. So that is what we are saying. So I just saved it. Now let us see what happens in here. So now you can see that only login link exists. The home, to-dos, logout, all the other links, they just disappeared. Because that's what this page says. If the user is not logged in, then just display the login link. So now when the user logs in, he can see all the other menu links. So if I go here and look at the developer tools application, and in here, so we can see the key value pairs. So we have achieved two things so far. We are able to write the authentication logic in a service, and we are able to access it from the login component. And then we are able to display the menu items based on the fact whether the user is logged in or not. So now we are just left with one final thing. We want to implement the logout logic. So let's see how we can do that. So in order to implement logout functionality, first we need to create a logout component, and we can do that by using this code nggc logout. Okay, so it's nggc and we need to do it in the to do project. So once we do that and press enter, the logout component gets created, and I did it already, and we can see the logout component here. So if I look at the logout HTML, it says logout works, and then we have .ts, .css files as usual. So I'm done creating the logout component. So the next step I need to do is to define the path in app routing.module.ts. If I look at the menu.component.html page, we could see that the path that is assigned to logout link is /logout. So this is the path that we need to add in app routing.module.ts. So I have already added it. So I'm saying if the path is logout, then execute logout component. And we should always remember to add it on the top of this error component, because if the path does not belong to any of these paths, only then error component gets displayed. So if I display this line instead of here, if I display this line next to this, then even if I type logout, I would still see the error component because this one gets interpreted first. So we need to make sure we always enter our paths on the top of the error component. So once we added this path, now whenever the user clicks logout link, he will be taken to the logout page, and it is currently displaying logout works. So if I look at logout component.html, this one is by default. So I'm removing this one, and instead I'm typing this thing. I'm typing this text that you're logged out. Thank you. See you again. So I did that. Now, as part of logout, what I want to do, I want to remove this key value pair from the session storage. I want to just remove this. So in order to do that, I once again go to our hard-coded authentication service, which is holding all the authentication related logic. And I'm adding logout method in here. And in this logout method, all I'm saying is session storage dot remove item authenticated user. So this would remove the key value pair of authenticated user from session storage. So once I implement the logout method in hard-coded authentication service, the next step would be to just call it from the logout component. So I go to logout component.ts, and in order to call hard-coded authentication service, I need to create a parameter to the constructor that can create the instance variable authentication service and assign the object of type hard-coded authentication service. So now I have the object instance variable authentication service available, and I should be able to access it from ng on init. So we already discussed about the difference between constructor and ng on init before. So the constructor gets executed while the logout component is getting created, because it gets executed when an object is created. Once the logout component is done getting created, so as soon as the logout component is initiated, Angular will then execute ng on init method. So as soon as the logout component is initiated, this method gets executed. It automatically gets executed. That means whenever the user clicks on logout link, logout component gets initiated, and then this one gets automatically executed. So we are calling logout method on the object authentication service, and then this one gets executed, and the session and this key value gets removed from the session storage. So that is how we are implementing the logout method. So if I execute logout now, this key value pair that was here, it just got removed. So I can execute it once again. So as soon as I log in, I could see this key value pair, and I can go view the to-dos, and it is still here. This is the home page, so I can go here, I can click to-dos, but I don't see the login link anywhere. And now as soon as I click logout, this one will disappear. So that is how we implemented logout functionality. So if we see all the authentication logic, 3 methods: authenticate, which gets executed when the user is logged in; logout, which gets executed when the user logs off; and if any other component wants to know whether user is logged in, then it can call this method. So all the authentication related logic is present in hard-coded authentication service, which is being called by various different components. So does anyone have any questions? Is it all clear?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, thank you. So would it be good if I continue with my presentations?
Yeah, yes, please.
Okay, that sounds good. Yes, that's all I have for today, and I can give my next presentation on Monday. So thank you very much for attending my presentation and listening it through. Have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.